Putting together the 67 Chevelle floor, getting ready to weld in the floor braces. As you can see here, I already have the inner rockers welded in place, and so it's just time to move on to the next step, and I thought I'd just provide a quick update. Generally, what I would prefer to do is use a complete floor that already has the floor braces welded in place, and maybe even go one step further and have a floor with the braces welded in place, as well as the inner and outer rockers already put together. But this is what the car came with. It came with the individual floor, the individual braces, and the inner and outer rockers. So I'm just going to go ahead and put it together. It's really not that big of a deal. I'll spend a couple of days or evenings working on it and getting it put together. You know, a lot of people will panic when they see the cost of a full floor, and they'll immediately decide to go this route with a floor pan and then the individual braces, and then weld everything up themselves. And that's perfectly fine. There's really no right or wrong. It really boils down to what the budget allows for, what a person's skill level is. Maybe even the timeline on the project if they're trying to get something done and they don't want to spend a lot of time putting pieces together. So there's a number of factors that come into play. For me, I would rather just have it all put together. It might actually be more cost effective to go ahead and purchase a complete floor. But again, there's a lot of guys that do this on their own, and time is not a problem. And so they would rather invest their own time than open up the checkbook and spend extra money that they may not need to spend. So again, there's really no right or wrong. So I'm going to start welding these braces in, and as you can see here, I've got them already prepped. So what's happening underneath each of these braces is I've actually scuffed both the underside of the braces as well as the grooves here, or the sections here where the braces are going to sit and be welded. And even though this floor pan looks pretty dirty, I've actually cleaned up each of these areas real well. And what I've done is I've used epoxy, and I've epoxied underneath the braces as well as inside of the braces on the side that you can't see. Maybe a little overkill, but that's just the way that I like to do it. I actually get in there and scuff the E-coat and then apply the epoxy. The other thing that you'll see here is that I've also sprayed each of these with weld-through primer. And I've used a number of weld-through primers, U-POL, SEM, 3M, and the one that I really like, I think actually works the best, is this Medallion Etch Weld Primer. It's RS512. Absolutely love it. It's one of the best primers I've ever used in terms of heat penetration and burn back. It doesn't have a lot of burn back when you weld, so it's going to work out perfect for what I need to do. I already have the inner rockers welded in here, and you can see that I've actually spot welded them in there along the way here. And I've also used some seam sealer. The factory would have used seam sealer up in this area, and so for that job I'm actually using this SEM 29382. This beige seam sealer. You could use any color you want at this location. What I like about this is it's actually made so that you can do resistance welding, and so that's basically what the spot welder is. And so you put it in there, and then you're able to do the spot welds, and you can actually weld right through that seam sealer and go from there. The other piece, just as I'm mentioning products that I'm working with, is the epoxy is this Medallion Tech Elite epoxy primer sealer. It's a 4-to-1 mix ratio. I have never used it up until this point. Still trying to decide what I think of it. I will say this, it's one of the highest build epoxy primers I've ever used. It literally shot like a high build 2K urethane primer. So I'm used to most of my epoxies going on like a sealer, very thin. I will say that what I like about it is I really like the sheen when it dries. It's got a real nice kind of a 0-degree gloss that looks really nice. And so I may use it for odds and end parts and suspension pieces, see how it goes. So So what I'll be doing now is I'm going to use this my quick spot HTP quick spot spot welder, and I'm going to get in here and start welding these braces in. I don't have enough reach to really get up to the entire part of the brace, and so I'm really going to just use my spot welder to get in here as far as I can, and I'm guessing I'm going to probably be able to go about a fourth of the way down this brace. And then what I'll do is I'll actually flip it over, and then I will plug weld with my wire welder the areas that I can't reach. The spot welder I have is great, and I've done all of the tests to show that it's bonding the two pieces together appropriately. But there's still a part of me that likes to have an old-fashioned plug weld, and so even on these inner rockers, when I flip it over, I'll come in here anywhere where I had originally pulled it down with a sheet metal screw. The other side, then I will see that hole, and that will be a spot where I will actually do a plug weld. And so you'll see here, as we get down inside of here, those will likely be plug welds all up in this hump, and as well here. And since these are seatbelt bracket areas, I'll definitely make sure that I plug weld those as well. So again, may seem like duplication of efforts, but I get a little paranoid with just a spot weld, and so I like to throw in a number of plug welds as well, just to ensure that I have good integrity and the structure is sound. So I'm going to get this all welded up, and that should be pretty much it for the floor, and we'll be ready to then move on to the next step of the process. The one thing that I also did that's really important, especially when you're putting these floors together with the loose braces, the individual braces, again, seems like a lot of work, but I had this entire thing sheet metal screwed together, and then I turned around and set it down on the frame. And the reason that I did that is that when I set it down on the frame, I was able then to use these body mount cage nuts, and I was actually able to put the body mounts and the bolts through the frame and into the floor. And what I wanted to do is I really wanted to make sure that everything was spaced out the right way. There's nothing worse than getting your floor all put together and then finding out when you drop it down on the frame that your braces aren't in the right location and you can't get your body bushing bolts in. And so again, it's very important. A lot of trial and error, a lot of test spinning, a lot of putting together, taking apart, putting back together. But again, it's all worth it, because the last thing that you want to do is get ready to put this floor into the car and then something not match up, and then you've got to hack everything up. So we're going to get this all put together, and hopefully it will go smoothly. I got the floor underneath the body, ready to raise up into the hole here. Still have plenty of bracing here. I'm always paranoid that something might happen, and I'm going to get some flexing of the car. But we'll get the floor in today and then set it down on the frame, make sure that everything lines up nicely. I'm putting a full trunk in as well, so before I set this floor up underneath here, I actually had the new floor pan and the new trunk pan on the frame itself. Everything lined up, all the body bushings lined up, the trunk to floor pan seam lined up very nicely. So I'm pretty confident that everything will be okay, but you never know what you're going to run into. So I don't have my lift installed in this shop yet. So as you can see, I've got the body on the rotisserie here still. And what I'm going to do, since I'm by myself today, is I'm just going to use an old trick that I used to use when I was in a different shop or different garage. So yeah, we're going to get this floor put in today. We're going to set it up in here. I've got it set back a little bit because I'm going to bring the front up higher, and it's got to come up and over the transmission tunnel here where I've got this welt through primer. And then in the back, as I said, I still have my trunk floor in place, and I'm going to leave that there. I've cleaned that flange up underneath so that I can set this floor up. So the hope here is that the full floor rear seat pan mates up nicely right here with the trunk, and then I get a nice fit up here at the transmission tunnel, and then of course at the right and left rockers. Hopefully all of that fits nicely. So I'm going to start putting it in place here. I'll sheet metal screw it in. I don't know if I'll do any welding. I might put a couple of tack welds in just to hold it in place. And then the next thing will be set it down on the frame. I'm always going to check those floor mounts or the body mounts to make sure that everything's lined up. And then from there, I'm going to rip the trunk out and put the new full trunk pan in the car. And again, before I do any final welding, I'm going to make sure that the floor pan and the trunk pan are fitting into the body nicely, and then that body is sitting down on the frame the way that it needs to. The last thing that you want to do is get a floor put in or a trunk put in and set it down on the frame and your body bushings don't line up. That's a big pain in the neck. So I'll come back after I get everything put together and I'll show you how it turned out. All right, well, I've almost got the floor in place, and I thought I'd stop just real quick and provide a quick update on how I'm doing this. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm using these little concoctions here to raise the floor up into through the body that's still sitting on the rotisserie since I don't have my lift installed yet. So if I can get underneath there, you can see how I've ran these 2x4, and I've got a 2x6. This isn't really a 2x4. I spliced together a couple 1x, but you can see here that I've got them running across from this side to the other side, and I didn't even need to use my jack for this. I was able to just walk it to each of the four corners and raise them by hand and get this in place. So what I've done is I've raised it a little bit higher here towards the front than I have towards the rear, and the reason for that is so that I have a little bit of room to get the front of the floor pan up and over the cowl section or the transmission hump on the firewall here. One of the things that you'll probably discover if you're doing this yourself is as you get this floor put up into place, if it fits the way that it should, it's going to be really nice and snug up here towards the kick panels. And so it becomes more difficult to push it in place by hand. So what I've done is once I got this floor pretty close to where I wanted it, I used just some straps here, just some ratchet straps. And as you can see, I've got a ratchet strap on both sides. And what I do is I run them through and put them into the torque boxes here because that's a lot more rigid and secure than trying to pull on the firewall. You probably could just pull on the firewall, but I go ahead and wrap them around and up and over through the torque boxes here. And then I just finished the fine tuning in terms of the placement of the floor by just ratcheting and pulling the floor up forward. And so as you can see here, I've got it pretty close to where I want it. I think now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get the back end up and in place, and then I'll make the final adjustments and start sheet metal screwing. Something else that you may notice, just depending on the stamping of your new floor and what might be left of the hump. I was fortunate enough that the hump was all 100% intact and good metal, whereas you can see here the floor had to come out. And so I've got toe boards that I'll use to replace in this section here. But one thing that you may notice that you have to do, and I had to do this just a little bit to get one side of my transmission hump up over the top of the firewall side, is just put a little jack in here and a little piece of wood, and then just gradually jack it up just ever so slightly. It'll flex, and then it will go up and over the lip, and then you can just ratchet strap it into place. So anyway, I just thought I would show that real quick. Sometimes these floors go in pretty easily, other times they don't. I will say that if you have to use the ratchet straps, that's usually a good sign that your floor is fitting nice and snug from rocker to rocker and from kick panel to kick panel. So that's always a good sign if you've got to use a little ratchet straps to persuade it to go into place. So as you can see here, the floor is installed. As I mentioned, I put the floor in from the bottom up into the car while it was still in the air. And then before I sit it down on the frame, I use sheet metal screws here in the rocker areas just to hold it in place. Then the other thing that I do, once this car is down on the frame, I'll remove all of those sheet metal screws at that point. That way I have a little bit of wiggle room. I can move that floor pan back and forth, front to rear, a little bit to make some final adjustments. If you keep that floor screwed in and basically have the body and the floor attached, you may run into some problems getting all of your body bushings to line up or to go in where they need to go. So once I get those screws out, I actually climb underneath the car and do some adjustments and work on getting all of the body bushings installed. That's going to be extremely critical. Do not start welding in your floor or your trunk or your torque boxes. Get, you know, all of those things, and then try to install the floor, because if you get those bolt holes off, you know, even by 1/4 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch, you're going to have a heck of a time getting that floor basically to bolt down. So keep an eye on that. So yeah, I was able to get all of the bolts in, and we're looking good. I do tighten them, you know, to kind of the factory. I don't really go to the factory specs, but I do get them snug so that the floor doesn't move around. And then at that point, I'll come back and I will reinstall my screws, both here on the rocker, kind of the seal plate area. And then I'll actually do some adjustments underneath. I don't know if you can see, but you can't. But I'll actually screw the inner and the outer rocket together with sheet metal screws along the bottom side there. So the floor is where it needs to be. The body is where it needs to be. Next steps now is to get back here and get rid of this dingy trunk that was in here. I've already cut all of this aluminum and galvanized metal out of it that somebody else had put in at some point, probably twofold, because there's tons of rust holes in it and they were evidently racing it. So this floor, this trunk floor is coming out. The quarter panels are going to come off of it. Wheel houses are coming off. Tail pan, the Dutchman here, the rear window, the trunk panel is going to be coming out. So this thing is going to start getting gutted. One other thing, just real quickly here, is take the extra time and get your doors and put your doors back on the body. Make sure that you get the doors on there. You're going to want these on here when you start doing your quarter panel work. The other thing too is that if your body twisted, if you've had it up on a rotisserie, if you had any twisting or tweaking of your body during that process, you're going to know that as soon as you go to put these doors back on. So believe it or not, these doors, I just slapped them up there. I haven't done a lot of adjustment on them. It's fine to adjust them as much as you want, but it is a little bit of all for naught, because you're going to want to adjust the doors based on your quarter panels that you go in, but you can also install the quarter panels based on a rough guesstimate of how the doors are fitting. All right, so next steps again is we're going to get this trunk cut out. We're going to basically cut the whole back end of this car out now, and we should start making some pretty good progress on this thing now that this floor's in.